Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Double Stuff Podcast, where we're double the hosts, double the topics, and double the fun. And I'm Alan.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Charity. Dan?
Dan. What
Dan,
happened? What happened to Dan?
No, it's just going to be the three of us this week, so we'll try that dynamic.
We'll be the Three Musketeers, and then we'll go back to normal next week.
The Four Musketeers afterwards.
Yeah, so we're not intentionally muting Dan. That's for April's the first week of April's.
April Fools.
That's right. So the topic of this week is actually, it's a citywide event. It's what is called Wichita's Big Read. Every year, Wichita Public Library, they get together and they kind of form a committee and they come up with a book for everybody to sort of enjoy and start up if you're doing a book club or whatever. And it helps promote literacy. And they also have different levels of books. So there's the main book, which is mostly for adult viewers, but then they also have a high school suggestion and a middle school suggestion, elementary, as well as I think they go as far as a preschool. And it all is under the same theme as the main book. When I came to Wichita in 2017, that was my first exposure to hearing about the Big Read Wichita. And the reason why I heard about it is working for Channel 8. We did the promotion spots for it. And it happened to be a memoir called The Late Homecomer. It was phenomenal. So I was on board right from the get-go with my first book in the Big Read Wichita in 2017, the fall of 2017. And the reason is I would have never picked this book. And it's the story of, it's an immigrant story about the Hmongs due to war, happened to come to, and with the war in Vietnam, that it follows the Hmong family that comes to America and their story. And it was full of joy and tears. I mean, this was one of the first books in a long time that as I'm reading it, I had to close it because I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty powerful. The book after that was Station 11. It was interesting that it was post-apocalyptic due to a pandemic, actually, and this was before the pandemic.
Way before COVID.
And this was 2018 when it was picked and selected. Instead of focusing on survival, it focused on the reasons that we need to survive. And the ending kind of felt like a miss for me.
Like open-ended kind of thing?
Yeah, I didn't like the ending. Last year's was Lab Girl, and it was fantastic. It was almost kind of another memoir about...
Last year, I'm assuming you mean 2019, correct?
2019.
Okay.
Yes. So the fall of 2019. And then, of course, the fall of 2020, everything was put off due to COVID. So the Wichita Big Read this year began technically in 2020, but is continuing on into 2021 with Circe by Madeline Miller.
And normally they have events and stuff, right? Like outside of the restrictions, they've got like meetings and lectures and stuff.
That's right. And typically they'll have the author come and give talks and talk about the book. And then there's a lot of activities for families and for children, students and things like that. So it's a really good deal. And I'm really proud that Wichita has a program like this. And I'm happy to see that it continued. And so that's what we'll be talking about today, Circe, which is set in Greek mythology. I don't remember the name of Circe. I mean, it was in my lexicon of, I know that that's a Greek name in the Greek mythology, but I didn't really know who she was and how she fit into the pantheon of Greek mythology and gods. So the main character, Circe, which the book is titled after, she's actually the daughter of a Titan, the god of the sun, Helios. Her mom was a goddess as well, but she was a lesser goddess, a nymph, something like that.
I was saying it commented on her beauty, and then it commented like the beauty of the mother.
The mother,
and,
yes.
Yeah, and then like the dad was like all powerful and stuff. I know, to sort of rabbit trail a little bit, it was interesting when I was doing it. I found an audiobook online. I found it interesting that I almost felt like at times I was reading one of those young adult novels that was like a coming of age type story, you know?
Very much.
And so that's sort of the vibe that I was getting from it.
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, like you were saying, I don't know if I can't remember if she was the firstborn, but she did have siblings. She was definitely not as attractive. The picture that's painted is that she's a bit homely in as far as her looks go. She's not as desirable as other goddesses that live in Oceanos Hall, which was her grandfather, another Titan god, the god of all the oceans. So she kind of split her time between her grandfather's halls and then her father's halls. It's strange, the focus on the family that we kind of come through in American literature, Western literature, is not that much of a focus in the Greek mythology and the stories that I grew up with in reading the Iliad, Troy, all kinds of the other Greek stories. Family is a part of it, but it's not as much as it is about the hero, the adventure, and the lessons kind of learned along the way. And I think that Madeline Miller did a really good job as far as exploring what those might have been like through a Western sort of literature lens, thinking about this one particular person, or not person, God, and how her relationship was with her siblings, her mother, her father, being ostracized, being actually exiled to the island of, and I want to pronounce it as Aiea.
Yeah,
let's just say here and now that we're probably going to mispronounce half of these names wrong at least. So forgive us if we say it incorrectly.
Yeah. I did not take my my master's or my PhD in Greek and mythology and literature or anything like that. So I don't even have a master's or a PhD. So
the author, she's very educated in those things. And looking up some information about the author from her website, and I looked up some different interviews and stuff that she did, it makes sense that she would write on those chosen topics because she's taught and tutored Latin, Greek, and Shakespeare to high school students for many years. I think the websites that I was reading was saying 15. So she's very well versed in that type of history and almost, I was going to say, dead language, Latin, because I took Latin in high school, but like it's something that's not taught unless it's like a specialty. A specialty type school, Yeah. But, when she was thinking about doing those stories, she read or had read to her, I guess, the Odyssey and stuff when she was younger. And she was just fascinated by the minor characters. Mm-hmm. And so, later on, obviously that stuck with her, but she was fascinated by those minor characters because even though the characters were minor, they still had a big role that played into the story, which is why they were mentioned in the first place, even though it was a minor character.
And I like that idea. That's one of the reasons why I was excited about getting into this book, the idea of the way that Circe is portrayed in Homer's Iliad is when Odysseus comes to the island, his men are turned into pigs. And the book, I don't know if it was Odysseus or Daedalus that picks up. And again, I'm going to have to study up on after reading this about Homer's Odyssey. But the interesting thing about it is she was depicted in the Odyssey a bit of an evil witch. Her character in the story was that of a villain. And in this book, it's kind of like what Disney did with like the Descendants, I think, or like try to go to wait a minute, there's another side to this story. And
like Wicked. I would say Wicked.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. So it's why did Circe become this way? And again, I don't know that much about how this lines up with the Greek mythology and the literature that precedes it, but it sounds like she did a very good job of making sure things lined up as far as how the story crosses into, as she's mentioned in other stories. I think the monster that she created, Scalia, which I always thought was just the Hydra, but that could be a part of a totally other story. But the monster Scalia that started off a nymph that had stolen her love, that her first love, and she was able to transform her into a monster. Well, she didn't transform her into a monster. She turned her into her true self, which was a monster. It was really interesting. It was a lot of fun, and it was a really fast-paced read until she gets pregnant. And then the story hit the brakes for me, and it became a bit of a chore to read. One of the questions that I have, and because I know that you guys did a lot of research on the author, was Madeline Miller, is she a mother? Is she a new mother at the time of this writing? What was kind of going on in her life?
So my information that I found on her, according to Publishers Weekly, is that she is married. If you've followed her career in writing, she's actually written 2 books. So Circe is that second book. The first one is The Song of the Achilles. So while she was writing that, she was a mother. Her daughter, who is now 3, she had her child. The husband did a lot of work in taking care of the kid while she was writing this other book. And then it says on the website, the demands of one child and the imminent arrival of another child made the creation of Circe, this book, a much more focused process. She's quoted in saying, "I turned in the final draft to my editor, and 3 days later, I had a C-section." So it was a very good motivator because that is a very hard deadline. So she is a mother of 2.
Yeah.
And so, I guess it was writing from that perspective, which when I'm looking up a book to read, whether it's this or anything else, I always find it interesting, the gender of the main character. And then I look at the gender of the author, because there's some books that I've written that are written by men, and they write, especially if they're writing a first person, the perspective of a woman. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't think she would really feel that way. I don't think that falls along with it. But, he's a guy, so he doesn't know how a woman thinks and how a woman feels. He's kind of going off of maybe what he knows, or if he's got sisters, wife, children, whatever. So I find it interesting that you did bring that up, because from her perspective, being a new mother, that was probably a big part in getting that story out.
And that makes a ton of sense now that you've said that, because for me, right after Daedalus leaves the island and she's pregnant, she's about to give birth to her son. It really slowed down is when she's exploring, and I'm talking about Circe, not the author, but Circe is exploring what being a mother is. And I think I have it. It's right around chapter 18. I can't remember if it was 18 or 17 at the beginning, but she describes as very difficult and very foreign to her, only because of the way that she was raised. Almost immediately, she was pretty much on her own. And not only that, but there's a curse that her son is about to have. So all the worry that a new mother would have, as I have had children, and I remember our firstborn, and she spent the first week of her life in the NICU. And so there was a ton of worry and anxiousness and hand-wringing, and almost kind of like if we were in the time period where this book takes place, it would almost seem like she was under a curse or something like that eventually got lifted. It just seemed like an exorbitant amount of time was spent in this area. All I wanted to do was turn the page and does the book pick up after this? And fortunately it did, and it ended very well. And I was very satisfied with the ending of the book when her son, the curse is somewhat past. It's a really interesting dynamic between her, Athena, Daedalus and his son, and her son and the wife as well. I mean, it's the cast of characters was vast in this book, and it was easy to kind of get lost with all the cast members. And I thought the author did really good job of trying to limit as much as possible with, I'm sure, especially with the information that you've been giving about the author, she could have poured in a lot more characters with a lot more storylines. And she did, I thought, a really good job of sticking very closely to her protagonist story, and the idea of, for a good protagonist, they need to be different at the end than they were at the beginning. And what we've talked about at the beginning, she was sort of the ugly duckling, the sort of the unwanted child. I mean, the Helios pretty much at the end disowns her, but she comes to her own. She stands up to the gods. And I think one of the quotes that Daedalus said to his wife once he returned to his island, he'd never met another god who cared less about their divinity. And so Madeline Miller did a good job of putting a lot of human emotion into these mythological figures, and the ending was very satisfying. And even though there was a little bit of a slow patch for me, for my reading, my liking, I'm really glad that I read the book, and I thought it was a very good pick.
I know that when I had started reading it, I was trying to actually envision it almost like a film, because that's just kind of how my mind goes, and trying to visualize her character and like who would play her and stuff. But at the time of this recording, me and Charity found out that they're actually going to be adapting Circe into a series, into a TV series. I think it's going to be on the HBO
Max
streaming. Yeah, I'm not sure when that's going to happen. Maybe later on this year. I'm not 100% sure, but that is in the works.
Sarah, you're going to have to watch the show through your fingers.
Yeah.
This story is rated R.
Pirate.
Yeah.
And there are pirates in the story. They get turned into pigs.
Well, on a quick ending note, Alan, since you were talking about there were slow parts of the book and how she wrote it, and the fact that we, found out earlier in the podcast that she was married and had a family and stuff. I mentioned earlier she's written 2 books, The Song of the Achilles, and the second book is Circe, and she's won multiple awards for both, so go look it up. It's actually kind of fascinating. The first book, The Song of the Achilles, is her debut novel that came out in 2011. So first of all,
long ago.
She had a great book come out at age of 33. I mean, what were you guys doing at 33? So
actually, I know what I was doing at 33. I was starting a podcast.
Well, I haven't gotten there yet, but I will let you know.
We've gone on our own little odyssey.
That's funny that you say that, because I was trying to say like what would our Greek names be? Because me and Cherry were talking about this one day. We were just driving. We're like
Chericles.
Yeah, Cherry's gonna be Chericles.
Chericles, Alonicus, and
nice.
Circe. Actually, you could be
I could be like Sarah say, and then what would Dan be?
Danacles.
Danacles. I don't know. We would all sit in our double stuff Acropolis, wearing laurels in our heads and wearing togas and talking about philosophical things like, if we had cotton candy at breakfast, would it still taste good?
No, but to finish up the other book thing though, to go with what you were saying, Alan, the first book that she did, Song of the Achilles, it took her 10 years to write.
Wow.
5 years into writing this book, though, she threw out the manuscript and started over from scratch because she wanted to get the book to be perfect or whatever. So obviously during that point, she at least had time to be a perfectionist maybe, and like to read and reread and throw stuff out and put stuff back in. The second book, as we learned earlier, she had a C-section 3 days after she did the draft. She didn't say in the interview that she gained a little confidence and that she didn't overthink it so much, but I think because she was pregnant, she probably had she been writing that before, she maybe would have thrown it out or changed it, but this I think she just wrote.
Yeah. Well, she had a deadline, is what you said before.
Yeah, she had the deadline. She had the baby right after. So it's interesting.
That's a good way to speeding
maybe the time of her life and what she was doing at that time, she had the option of writing and rewriting. But I did find that interesting that after 5 years of writing this book, she threw it out and started over of the first book. But the second book came out in 2018 at the age of 40. So at the age of 40, she's written two amazing books and has gotten multiple awards for both of those. So she's done very well for herself so far. And I'm sure we're going to see more from her.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I'm excited to go back and read more and discover more about mythology. Because like I said, overall, I found it very enjoyable. I thought it was a fantastic story, a really good character to explore, and a very strong protagonist where she started and then where she arrived at the end of the story.
Now, you had mentioned near the beginning, you had made a reference to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Have you read both of those?
High school. I mean, 20 years ago.
Well, in high school, we got like the greatest hits. I had never heard of that name. I'd never heard that name before. When we were learning it in school, we barely touched on it. We focused more on ancient Greek history, and then there was a little paragraph or maybe half a chapter about the mythology.
I mean, that's more of what you do for a college class. For Sterling College, my first semester, starting there in freshman year, we had a literature class called Monster Literature, and so we read.
That sounds like fun.
It was a great class. We read part of the Odyssey. We read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We read Dracula. So it was more of crazy, creepy type creatures, and then we did more of literature and stuff on that type of topic.
Well, I think that we have explored this fully, and I think that we can all say that this is a good read, a good pick for Wichita's Big Read. Keep those pages turning and let us know what you're reading and what you're into, and perhaps you can suggest something that we would like to explore as a group. Let us know. Thanks for listening to today's episode. You can find other episodes on doublestuffpod.com or on your favorite podcast apps. You can also participate in the fun on social media on Facebook and Instagram at doublestuffpodcast and on Twitter at doublestuffp, as in the letter P.